Archaeologist, philosopher, bonsai aficionado, author, black belt, and squanderer of over 50,000 hours watching B-movies. He uses this wealth of useless knowledge to bring you classic movie reviews with snark and world-famous short summaries. Now broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Classic Movie Reviews with Snark.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today is the third of our October 2015 horror movies. Episode 43, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959, is a post-apocalyptic tale of a few survivors. I originally selected this movie that I haven't watched for a couple of scores because I thought it might be based on Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, 1954. However, it was not based on I Am Legend, but I will talk more about that in episode 44 and 45 as we bring our October 2015 horror series to a close. This movie is based on the novel Purple Cloud by M.P. Shale and the story End of the World by Ferdinand Rayer. One thing I like about this movie is it only has 3 actors, so there won't be a lot of in-depth biographies. Before I started reading about the movie, I assumed the 3 people represented the 3 elements in the title. Again, I was not correct, but I will talk more about that at the end of today's episode. The first actor is the great singer Harry Belafonte, who played the role of Mine Inspector Ralph Burton. Belafonte grew up in Jamaica and the British West Indies. I would call him a singer that acts, but there's nothing wrong with his acting. Belafonte's film debut was in Bright Road, 1953, with Dorothy Dandridge. They reunited for Carmen Jones, 1954. He was in Island in the Sun, 1957, again with Dandridge. Like his good friend Sidney Poitier, Belafonte was very interested in civil rights and made several films that touched on these themes. Some of these films are The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959, Odds Against Tomorrow, 1959, The Angel Levine, 1970, and White Man's Burden, 1985, with John Travolta. Oddly, Belafonte acted in a couple of blaxploitation films as well, Buck and the Preacher, 1972, with Sidney Poitier, and Uptown Saturday Night, 1974. Belafonte is still alive and remains active in civil rights. Inger Stevens played the role of Sara Crandall, the only woman left alive. Stevens was born in Sweden in 1934. When she was 6 years old, her mother abandoned the family for another man. Her father moved to America and remarried. In 1944, he brought his children to the U.S. However, home life was not good here either, and Stevens ran away to a burlesque chorus as a teenager. Brought back home, she graduated from high school and left for New York, where she worked as a model. During this same time, she studied at the Actors Studio. The beautiful blonde with a sparkling smile worked her way up doing commercials in summer stock. Stevens got her first film role at the age of 22, but a problem soon developed. Opposite Bing Crosby in Man on Fire, 1957, she began an affair with the actor. She repeated this with James Mason in Cry Tara, 1958, Anthony Quinn, her director in The Buccaneer, 1958, and Harry Belafonte, her co-star in The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959. This fed her depression, and she tried to take her life on New Year's Day, 1959. She went on Broadway for a time and then started doing the mainstream television circuit, such as Bonanza, 1959, The Twilight Zone, 1959, and Route 66, 1960. This led the way to her 3-year role as the Swedish governess in The Farmer's Daughter, 1963-66. After her television show, Stevens was able to rebuild her movie career. Her roles during this time included A Guide for the Married Man, 1967, with Walter Matthau, Hang 'em High, 1968, with Clint Eastwood, Madigan, 1968, with Henry Fonda and Richard Widmark, Fire Creek, 1968, with Henry Fonda and James Stewart, Five Card Stud, 1968, with Dean Martin and Robert Mitchum, House of Cards, 1968, with Orson Welles, and A Dream of Kings, 1969, with Anthony Quinn. She began having affairs with her co-stars again. In April of 1970, Stevens signed on as a series lead in The Most Deadly Game, 1970. Less than a week later, Stevens was found unconscious. She died on the way to the hospital from barbiturates and alcohol. She was 35 years old. Following her death, it was reported that she had been secretly married to African-American Ike Jones since 1961. Mel Ferrer played the role of Benson Thacker, the late arrival. Ferrer was born in New Jersey in 1917. Born to wealthy parents, Ferrer attended prep school and then Princeton University. At the age of 15, he started doing summer stock. In 1938, he became a dancer on Broadway, and 2 years later, he became a stage actor. After contracting polio, Ferrer worked in radio for a time. This was followed by being a director for NBC in New York. He worked as John Ford's assistant on Fugitive 1947. Ferrer's first movie role was Lost Boundaries 1949. Other memorable roles include The Lame Puppeteer in Lili 1953, Prince Andre in War and Peace 1956, and The World, the Flesh, and the Devil 1959. He directed The Secret Fury 1950 with Claudette Colbert and Green Mansions 1959 with his then-wife Audrey Hepburn. In 1960, the couple divorced and Ferrer moved to Europe where he continued to produce and act. He did the usual run of American television before he died in 2008 at the age of 90. Story: Mine Inspector Ralph Burton, Harry Belafonte, is in a shaft in Pennsylvania when the roof collapses, trapping Burton underground. He has air and food, and it seems he is in contact with the surface. He has a one-way conversation with the topside.
This one's had it. I don't know if you can hear me, but there sure isn't enough left of this thing for me to hear you. Hey, if that means that you can hear me, rap again, huh? No. Give me 3, 3, and then 2. 3, 3, and then 2, okay? Anytime you're ready. I'll be right here. Hey! All right. I'm wired for sound. Hey, listen, I'm okay. And the air down here is still pretty good. Just start digging whenever you're ready. And don't hurry, huh?
He hears digging from above, but after a few days it seems to taper off. On the 5th day, the pumps shut down. Given no choice, Burton begins to dig out. After a while, he makes it through the fall and to the surface. There is no one there and no bodies. In the office, he finds out that the radio stations are not broadcasting. He sees some old newspapers that say, UN retaliates for use of atomic poison. World doom, says dying president. And another that states, millions flee from the city, end of the world. It never says what country released the poison, but given the Cold War tension, it is assumed to be the Soviet Union. Burton goes into town, and it is deserted as well. No bodies. He picks up a Geiger counter, bullets, and a gun at the Civil Defense Headquarters. With a little hot wiring, he picks up a sweet convertible with rather large fins. This scene is copied nearly verbatim in the Omega Man 1971. He slowly makes his way to New York, where he has to leave his car because the bridge and tunnels are blocked with abandoned cars. Still no bodies. In fact, no bodies are shown in the whole movie. Way to save on extras. He finds a small rowboat and motors across to the city. The city is completely deserted. Burton breaks down in a church, dealing with the fact that he is alone. He then goes a little crazy, firing his gun in the air, screaming, "Come out," while he drags a squeaky wagon of food and water along.
What are you hiding? What are you hiding from me for? What did I do? I know you're there. You're staring at me. I can feel you all staring at me. Come out! Come out!
After his supper, he starts picking up, showing that he is a builder. That night, he finds a radio station that still has power. He finds out from a tape that the lethal dust lasted for 5 days and the world has basically ended. He flips a coin to decide which way to go, and as he leaves the shot, a set of women's feet step on the coin. As Burton wanders the city, it is revealed that he is being stalked by Sara Crandall, Inger Stevens, a 20-something white girl. When he selects his new apartment, there is a Robbie the Robot and Raggedy Ann doll on the shelf. Is this a metaphor for Burton and Sarah? Believing that he is all alone, he begins to rebuild the world. As an engineer, he knows how to solve problems, and this is how he keeps himself sane. He's a bit of an early MacGyver. At one point, Burton collects a male and female mannequin. He calls the male Snodgrass and comments on how he is always smiling. Again, this was ripped off by the Omega Man in 1971 as he talked to a bust. Burton rewires the whole block and lights the streets and stores. Sara is still hiding in the shadows. In a fit of desperate loneliness, Burton throws Snodgrass out the window for smiling. Again, this is a metaphor for what could happen later in the movie when the second male arrives. When the dummy hits the ground, Sara screams and runs out. They meet on the street, but the first meeting doesn't start out well. Finally, they settle down a bit. Sara survived by staying in a decompression chamber. Sara seems emotionally damaged like the Raggedy Ann doll. After a bit, he wires her apartment with electricity as well. He gets the telephones working. He begins broadcasting on the radio every day at noon. Totally ripped off by I Am Legend 2007. Sara's feelings for Burton are growing, and she wants to move into his building, but he cannot get past the old racial prejudice of American society. Sara is pissed.
How about that? You know, I've been trying to find ways of pumping this up here. You don't know how much time that's...
Time? As if there isn't enough time. There's more than enough time. I guess we're on the verge of quarreling.
You and me? What for?
I feel like it.
Look, if I've done anything to get on your nerves...
What are you going to do with these books?
I'm going to save them, like all the others on the floor below.
You're going to keep carting books in here till the whole building falls down.
Somebody has to save them. I went down to the library, and the roof's falling in. It's filled with water. All the books are getting wet and dirty.
I know. Everything is getting rusty, including me.
You ought to stay busy like I do.
I'm free, white, and 21, and I'm going to do what I please.
Sara talks about getting married, and Burton plays it off like he will perform the ceremony. Sara asks for a haircut, and Burton has trouble being that close to her and touching her hair.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You know me well enough to be honest with me.
Don't push me. I'll be so honest it'll burn you.
I know what you are, if that's what you're trying to remind me.
That's it, all right. If you're squeamish about words, I'm colored. And if you face facts, I'm a Negro. And if you're polite Southerner, I'm a Negra. And I'm a nigger if you're not.
I'm none of those things, Ralph.
A little while ago, you said you were free, white, and 21. That didn't mean anything to you. Just an expression you've heard for 1,000 times. Well, to me, it was an arrow in my guts.
Ralph, what do I say? Help me. I know you. You're a fine, decent man. What else is there to know?
That world that we came from, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't even know me. Why should the world fall down to prove I'm what I am and that there's nothing wrong with what I am?
After the fight, Burton goes away for 3 days. When he comes back, he asks to be friends and brings her back a huge diamond for her birthday. That day, he gets a call back on the radio and realizes there are survivors in Europe. Burton's joy is quickly dashed as he believes having others around will keep him and Sara apart. Sara goes totally cold from that statement.
The sweetest wine in the world is the fruit of the...
As soon as Mr. Burton finishes his number, would you please have him come and sit with me?
Mr. Burton isn't permitted to sit with the customers.
But as she throws herself at him, he retreats behind the racial problems. She is crushed by the constant rejection. The next morning, Sara calls Burton to tell her a boat is coming up the river. They go to meet it, and it's driven by a very ill, white Benson Thacker, Mel Ferrer. The pair nurse Thacker back to health, although Burton feels it may be bad for him. As soon as Thacker is well, he starts to bum rush Sara. She likes it, and they start seeing each other. Burton pulls back to give Thacker room to move in on Sara. Burton does everything but leave town. When Thacker and Burton are discussing Sara, Burton calls him Snodgrass, implying that he will kill him. Sara busts the two men in mid-conversation about her, and she runs out.
I won't get in your way, and I won't get out of your way. That's fair enough?
Well, it's fair, all right. But is it the best thing? Clocks mean more to me than they do to you. I was never much for the waiting game anyway. I don't like it.
I don't like fencing.
All right, then I'll put it on the line. I have nothing against Negroes, Ralph.
That's white of you.
Don't shaft me. I won't hold still for it. I meant what I said. We have only one problem. There are two of us and one of her. What are we going to do about it?
Why don't you toss a coin?
Thacker catches up, and as they kiss, you can see rifles behind him in the window. After a little kissing, she freaks out and leaves. Thacker arms himself. Sarah shows up at the radio station and tries to throw herself at Burton. He won't have anything to do with her, but he does tell her that he loves her. Later, Thacker and Sara are on a date, and he says he can force her or he can take care of the problem. Thacker goes to Burton's house with a gun and challenges Burton to a death match.
What do you want from me?
Move on. See how things are in Chicago or San Francisco.
I don't run so good. This and that I'll do and glad to do it. But running away isn't my style.
I guess I knew I couldn't scare you off. Wouldn't be any good anyway. I'd be waiting for you to change your mind and come back. I'd keep watching for you every day, around every corner. I'd have to go looking for you. Well, it's you or me. And now's the time.
World War IV.
Yeah. Get ready for it.
Make no mistake. I'll kill you if you push me to it.
So long, Ralph.
Sarah calls Burton over, and when he arrives, Thacker starts shooting at him. Burton arms himself, and the two men start hunting each other in the empty streets of New York. The hunt goes on for a time, and Burton ends up at the United Nations building. He reads the inscription, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." From Isaiah 2:4. Burton throws down his gun and goes to find Thacker. Thacker cannot murder an unarmed man at close range, and he drops his gun as well. Sarah runs down the street to Burton, but he turns to leave. She takes his hand and tells him he can't go. Sarah calls Thacker to wait, and she takes his hand as well. The trio walk down the empty street, and "The Beginning" is flashed across the screen. Kinky. So to bring it back to the title, I just assumed that Burton was the world because he worked in a cave, Sarah was the flesh because she was the female, and Thacker was the devil because he messed up the Garden of Eden. Wrong. Totally wrong. It comes from Christian theology. In Latin, mundus, caro, et diabolus are the enemy of the soul, and sometimes the opposition of the Trinity. The source of this goes back to Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia, and Jesus' parable on the seeds in Mark 4:15-17. The phrase is also part of the Book of Common Prayers. From all the deceit of the world, the flesh, and the devil, good Lord, deliver us. So it seems that the trio has defeated the world, the flesh, and the devil, and are going forth to build a new world without the problems of the past one. World-famous short summary: man afraid to ask for first date, almost loses girl to another guy before settling on a mutual solution. If you enjoyed this week's show, please tell your friends. And if you really want to help, drop over to iTunes and give me a review. If you want to comment, recommend a movie, or just say hi, follow the links in the show notes to my site. Beware the Moors.